I want you to try something for a second. It sounds like child's play, but just bear with me here. Think about the word apple.
Okay, an apple.
Yeah, just say it out loud or hold it in your mind. Apple. Now, what exactly is happening right there?
Right, it's a huge question.
Are you talking about the actual physical fruit, like the heavy, cold red thing that you could physically hold in your hand and take a bite out of? Or are you talking about the picture of a red fruit that just flashed onto the screen of your mind?
Hmm.
Or wait, are you talking about the physical sound waves that just vibrated out of your vocal cords? Or maybe you're picturing the letters APPLE printed on a page.
When you really pause and, sit in the friction of that question, the ground sort of just falls out from under
It
you.
really did.
We spend our entire lives throwing words around like they are the actual things themselves. You ask for an apple, someone hands you an apple, and you just think, oh, the system works.
Right, flawlessly.
But the gap between the sound your mouth just made and the physical fruit growing on a tree out in Washington State is, well, it's an absolute abyss. You are actually navigating multiple, completely distinct dimensions of reality simultaneously, just to ask for a snack.
It is deeply unsettling once you realize it, because if the word isn't the thing, then what are we actually doing when we talk to each other?
Exactly. We're operating blindly.
Yeah, I realized how utterly blind I've been to the mechanics of my own thoughts. We are operating this incredibly complex machinery of language and reality, but most of us don't have the source code.
No, we don't.
And when you look at the thinkers who actually took the time to map this out, we're going to dive into a continuous thread of philosophy today, stretching back 2.5 millennia.
It's a very long thread.
From ancient Greek giants like Plato and Aristotle, flowing straight through the hyper-meticulous classical, Islamic, and Ottoman logicians, all the way to modern linguists. And they all realized that understanding this gap is the ultimate skeleton key for critical thinking.
It really is the foundation of not being manipulated.
Yeah.
In an environment where we are just endlessly bombarded with symbols and texts and images and rhetoric.
Yeah, constantly.
If you do not understand the mechanics of how meaning is constructed, you are entirely at the mercy of the people who do.
Wow. Yeah, that's a scary thought.
These ancient logicians, they weren't just splitting hairs for fun. They were trying to build a clean operating system for truth. They wanted to figure out what is real and what is just, an illusion created by language.
I am honestly so fired up about this. On the surface, the history of formal logic sounds like something that requires elbow patches and a dusty library.
Right, very academic.
But it is actually this mind-bending matrix. It's literally the geography of reality. So I want to start at the absolute ground floor for this deep dive. The simplest unit. Let's go back to that apple. Or actually, let's use another object. A mouse.
Okay, a mouse.
The squeaking rodent, or the piece of plastic you click with. How does a random noise generated by my throat attach itself to a physical object out in the world?
So classical logicians called this specific mechanism linguistic signification, or, in their specific terminology, delame LFSI.
De la LFC. Okay.
And the breakthrough realization they had here is that the connection between a word and its meaning is not natural.
Wait, not natural?
Right. It's not biological, and it isn't even inherently rational. It is entirely conventional. The term they used is vasi, or muvasa, which essentially just means a collective agreement.
So there is absolutely zero inherent mouseness in the sound mouse.
None.
Like, if I examine the sound waves in a laboratory, I wouldn't find a little tail or a scroll wheel hidden in the audio.
Not a trace.
Yeah.
If we didn't have a pre-existing collective agreement that those specific sound waves point to that specific animal or object, the sound is just noise.
Just totally meaningless noise.
Exactly. It's an agreement we are all constantly upholding without even realizing it. And to really grasp the weight of what an agreement like this entails, you have to look at the etymology.
Oh, I love this part.
The logicians studying this in the Ottoman tradition, they drew on linguistic roots that are incredibly poetic. They traced this concept of convention vada in Arabic, which relates to the physical act of putting or setting something down.
This completely reframed the way I think about talking to people. Because when you map that root concept onto the evolution of Turkish vocabulary, you get this vivid, almost cinematic progression of how humans learn to communicate.
You really do.
It starts with the root connecting to words like koymak, right?
Right.
Which means to put something down.
Yes. And that evolves into konmak, which means to settle or to land.
Like a bird.
Right. Picture a bird landing on a branch. It is a deliberate, delicate setting down of its own weight. Or think about human history, nomadic tribes migrating across the steppes.
Right. Right.
When they finally stop to build a fire and pitch tents, they are settling. They are the konar Gersur, the ones who settle and the ones who migrate. The act of settling requires establishing a shared space.
And then the vocabulary just expands from the action to the people and the places, which is so cool. From kanmak to settle, we get konuk, which is the word for a guest. Because what is a guest?
Someone who settles with us.
Exactly. It's someone who has agreed to temporarily settle with us in our space. And where do they settle? In a konak, a mansion, or a designated resting place, we are physically putting ourselves down together in a shared architecture.
Which brings us to the culmination of all those words. The word for speaking, or conversing, is konusmak.
Konushmak, to converse, which literally carries the DNA of settling face-to-face with someone.
Isn't that beautiful? When you converse, you are creating a konak in the air between you.
Yeah.
You are creating a shared architecture where you both agree to set down your meanings according to the exact same rules.
You're settling on the terms.
Mutually settling on the terms of engagement, yes. Without that shared settlement, that muvaza, the words just bounce off each other as meaningless noise.
Okay, wait, let me try to map this onto something a bit more modern to make sure I'm fully grasping the mechanics here.
Go for it.
It sounds like language is basically a massive multiplayer game where we're all forced to use the same software patch.
Oh, I like that.
If I point to the thing on my desk and say mouse, but you don't have the English language mouse patch installed in your brain, the game crashes. We literally cannot communicate.
Right, you're just making sounds.
I'm making an arbitrary mouth noise and you're just staring at me. The settling face-to-face fails because our software is incompatible. We haven't downloaded the same agreement.
The software patch is a brilliant way to conceptualize the muvaza. The linguistic signifier, the lafaz, is completely powerless without that shared download.
Makes total sense.
And this was the crucial first step for classical logicians. They realized they had to isolate and quarantine this very specific artificial type of meaning, these conventional, agreed-upon words, if they were ever going to build a reliable system for finding truth.
But hold on. If spoken language is just this giant arbitrary software patch, that doesn't account for everything.
What do you mean?
What about the things we communicate without needing an agreement? Like if I step on a rusty nail and scream in agony, I don't need you to have the English scream patch installed to know that I am in pain.
Right.
You just know. So how did they categorize that kind of stuff?
They were meticulously aware of that distinction, actually. This takes us beyond words into the realm of nonverbal signification, what they call deladi gairi lafsai.
Okay.
And they didn't just lump all nonverbal communication together in one bucket. That would be way too sloppy for a logician.
Naturally.
They divided the nonverbal world into three incredibly distinct categories. Natural, which is tabi'e, rational or logical, which is akli, and conventional, which is vasi.
I found the specific historical examples they used for these categories so evocative. Let's walk through them. Start with the scream, or the natural category, the tabi.
So a classic example found in ancient logic texts for natural nonverbal signification is the sudden blushing of a lover's face when they unexpectedly lock eyes with their beloved.
I just love how dramatic philosophers can be.
It is dramatic, but it's mathematically precise. Think about the mechanism there.
Okay.
The physical reaction, the capillaries expanding, the blood rushing to the cheeks, signifies a massive internal emotional state naturally. There is absolutely zero linguistic agreement required for that.
Right. You don't need a dictionary for a blush.
Exactly. Two people who speak completely different languages understand it instantly. There isn't even a rational deduction happening. The biological, unmediated response is the signifier. It's the body bypassing the mind entirely.
Okay, so that's tabi. The biology does the talking. But what about the second category, the rational or logical, the akli? The classic example here was footprints in the snow, right?
Yes, consider the difference between a blush and a footprint. If you were walking in the woods and see a footprint in the snow, that footprint does not possess the inherent biological meaning of a human being, the way a blush possesses the emotion of a lover.
Right, it's just snow that got moved.
It is just displaced snow. However, you also don't need a cultural dictionary to understand it. Your intellect steps in. You logically deduce it. Footprints require a foot. Therefore, someone walked here recently.
Hmm.
The signifier points to the meaning through a process of inescapable rational necessity.
It's deductive rather than biological.
Right.
Which brings us to the third nonverbal category, the conventional or vasi.
Right.
These are things we see with our eyes rather than hear with our ears, but they still completely rely on that software patch we talked about earlier. They are totally arbitrary.
Traffic lights are the perfect modern stand-in for this.
Oh, yeah.
You see a red light, your foot hits the brake. You see a green light, you hit the gas. There's absolutely nothing in the natural universe, no law of physics, that dictates red means stop.
Just a color.
It is a purely arbitrary, conventional agreement that humanity made up to keep cars from crashing into each other. If an extraterrestrial landed at an intersection, their biology wouldn't react to the red light naturally, and no amount of pure logical deduction would lead them to the conclusion that red means stop your vehicle.
Right, they'd just see glowing glass.
They would have to be taught the patch.
Mathematics is exactly the same way. This really clicked for me when I thought about a plus sign.
Oh, that's a great example.
It's just a vertical line crossing a horizontal line. We all agree it means add these things together, but if you take that exact same physical shape and just tilt it 45 degrees, suddenly it's an X.
Right.
It means multiply. Or if you change the context completely, it's a religious cross. The physical ink on the page hasn't changed its atomic structure at all, but by rotating it, we've teleported it into a completely different conventional agreement.
And historically, the way humans have utilized these conventional physical signs is a whole study in itself.
Yeah.
Classical scholars love pointing out examples like counting on fingers. The Arabic term is yukut.
Okay.
Holding up 3 fingers to represent the abstract mathematical concept of 3 isn't a natural law. It's a physical object being used as a conventional sign. Or an even heavier example, the use of boundary stones to mark territory.
Right, to divide land.
Yes, known as nusup, or in the Roman tradition, terminus.
Terminus, the Roman god of boundaries, literally a god of the line in the dirt.
Exactly. A farmer places a heavy stone at the edge of his wheat field. To the natural universe, to the tabii or the akli, it's just a rock.
Right.
A bird doesn't care about it. The rain doesn't care. But conventionally, to other humans, that stone signifies, this is where my sovereignty ends and yours begins. Cross this, and it is an act of war.
That's wild.
A chunk of granite is elevated to profound symbolic meaning entirely through human agreement.
Okay, here's where my brain starts to find loopholes, and I want to see how the logic holds up. Is it possible for a sign to migrate across these 3 categories?
Oh, migrate. How so?
Like you mentioned the lever blushing or someone crying. That's a natural sign, Tubby, eh? But what if someone is fake crying? Like a toddler trying to get a toy or an actor in a movie. They are using a biological mechanism, but they are weaponizing it intentionally to signify an emotion they don't actually feel. Does that natural sign get hijacked and become a conventional sign?
That is exactly the kind of friction the classical logicians wanted their students to explore. When a natural sign is artificially replicated with intent, it enters this fascinating gray area.
Right, because it's both.
It is borrowing the visceral power of the tabia, because human beings are biologically hardwired to feel empathy when we see tears, but it's being deployed with the cold intentionality of the vasi.
A counterfeit natural sign.
It's exactly a counterfeit natural sign. And honestly, it proves why this framework is so vital. If you don't understand the underlying mechanics of how a sign works, you are incredibly vulnerable to having your natural reactions manipulated by someone using conventional intent.
Man, that explains so much about modern marketing and social media. People deploying counterfeit natural signs to hack our biology.
Constantly.
But this leads us to the next massive hurdle in this deep dive. We've mapped out how things mean something. We've got our verbal patches, our natural biology, our logical deductions, and our nonverbal agreements. But where do these meanings actually live? Like, if I hold up the concept of a mouse or a boundary stone, is that meaning floating out there in the physical dirt, or is it locked entirely inside my skull?
To answer that, we have to look at a major historical showdown. It is a profound critique of modern linguistics, specifically by contrasting it against a classical model that has survived for over 2 millennia.
Let's set the stage for this fight, because in the modern corner, we have something called the Richards-Ogden triangle.
Right.
If you take a Linguistics 101 class today, you'll probably see this. It's a triangle that maps meaning. Point A is the object in the real world. Point B is the mind, which holds the concept. Point C is the symbol or the word, object, mind, word. They all connect in a nice, neat little triangle. It seems completely reasonable.
It seems very reasonable, and it's widely taught. But classical thinkers from the Aristotelian tradition would look at that triangle and say it is fundamentally flawed.
Because it's too simple.
It is too flat. By drawing a triangle, you imply a somewhat equal, simultaneous relationship between the object, the mind, and the word. The classical model completely rejects that flatness. They argued that reality isn't a triangle. It is a strict, step-by-step hierarchy.
Instead of 3 points on a flat plane, they built 4 distinct tiers of existence. I really want to spend time here because realizing this felt like putting on a pair of glasses and seeing the code of the matrix falling down the walls.
It's a paradigm shift.
Walk us through the 4 levels. Let's start at the absolute base reality.
Okay, so the foundational tier is the eine level. This translates to the objective external reality. It is the physical universe existing independently of whether you or I are here to observe it.
Okay.
If we go back to our very first thought experiment, the eine is the actual biological apple growing on a branch in an orchard, subject to gravity and cellular decay.
The thing itself. No concepts, just atoms.
Exactly. Then we step up to the second tier, the zine level. This is the mental reality.
Genie.
When you look at that eine apple, or even just remember one, your brain generates an image, a concept, an idea of the apple. That idea exists entirely within the confines of your consciousness. The physical apple is heavy. The zine apple weighs nothing.
So if a tree falls in the woods and no one is around, the eine tree definitely fell, but the zine sound doesn't exist because there's no mind to hold the concept.
Yeah.
Okay. What's tier 3?
Tier 3 is the lafsi or lasani level. This is the spoken reality. Because your mind cannot reach out and telepathically hand your zine concept to my mind, you have to push air through your vocal cords and vibrate it to produce the sound apple.
The sound waves. The arbitrary software patch we agreed on.
Precisely. And finally, we arrive at the 4th tier, which is the hadi level. The written reality, the physical ink on a page, the pixels on a screen, forming the letters APPLE or the lines of a drawing.
Okay, so eine is object, zine is mind, lafsi is sound, hadi is text. But you emphasized earlier that this isn't a triangle. Why is the sequential order of these 4 tiers so non-negotiable?
Because it is a chain of symbolic representation that only flows in one direction.
Okay.
The written word, the hadi, does not point directly to the physical apple, the eine. The written letters APPLE are merely a visual symbol representing a spoken sound, loxy.
Oh, wow.
That spoken sound is merely an auditory symbol representing a mental concept, zine. And that mental concept is merely your mind's attempt to map the external physical reality, eine.
It is the ultimate cosmic game of telephone.
That's a great way to put it.
I'm trying to process what this actually means for how we live today. Think about an argument you have over text message. You are furious. Your body is physically reacting, heart rate up, adrenaline flowing.
Right.
That is eine reality. Your mind forms the concept of your anger. The zine. You think of the words you would scream out loud, the lafsi, but you can't. So your thumbs tap out the letters, I am angry. The pixels on the screen, the hadi, are 3 entire dimensions of reality removed from the physical truth of your racing heart.
The distortion across those levels is immense. And this is exactly why the logicians argue the modern triangle fails. If you just draw straight lines between the object, the mind, and the text, you forget the degradation of the signal.
You lose so much fidelity.
You forget how far removed a tweet or a text message is from the physical truth.
To prove just how easily our brains glitch when these 4 layers collapse into each other, we have to look at one of the most famous paintings in art history.
Ah, Magritte.
Yes, it's normally taught in art classes, but viewing it through this 2,500-year-old logic makes it so much more profound. I'm talking about René Magritte.
Magritte's masterpiece, The Treachery of Images, La Trahison des Images, painted in 1929. It is incredibly famous. It features a highly realistic, beautifully rendered painting of a classic smoker's pipe.
Right.
And directly beneath the pipe, painted in elegant cursive text, are the words, Ceci n'est pas une pipe. This is not a pipe.
And if you don't know the 4 levels of reality, it just feels like a cheeky, surrealist prank.
Yeah.
You look at it and go, Renee, I'm looking right at it. It's obviously a pipe. What are you talking about?
Exactly.
But apply the eine, zine, lafsi, hadi framework to it. Why isn't it a pipe?
Because Magritte is brutally exposing our tendency to skip the levels. Why isn't it a pipe? Because it is a painting of a pipe.
Right. It's paint on canvas.
In our classical framework, the painting lives entirely in the hadi level. It is a visual representation. You cannot pack tobacco into it. You cannot light it on fire. It possesses absolutely none of the physical eine properties of a real pipe. existing in the external world.
And the text below it that says, "This is not a pipe," that text isn't a pipe either. The cursive letters are hari, signifying the French, sounds lafsi, signifying the concept in your head, zini.
The treachery he is referring to in the title is the treason of our own minds.
Wow.
The mind is the only place the concept of the pipe actually exists in that moment. Your mind looks at the Hadi painting, immediately references its own zini blueprint of a pipe, declares a match, and says, that is a pipe.
But it's not.
But then your mind reads the Hadi text below it, which forcefully contradicts you. Megret forces the viewer to confront the horrifying gap between a symbol and the reality it claims to represent.
There is actually a secondary version of this painting he did years later that pushes the knife even deeper. He painted the original painting, the pipe and the text, sitting on an easel inside a room. But floating in the air above the easel is a massive, seemingly real pipe.
Hanging in the air.
It's like he's putting the Aini level right next to the Hadi level inside the frame, just to mock how badly our brains want to collapse them together.
It is brilliant because logic, as a discipline, largely leaves the physical objects, the Aini, alone. Logicians knew centuries ago that you cannot fit a real tree or a real pipe inside a book. So formal logic focuses almost entirely on the mental concepts, zini, and the spoken words, lafsi, the middle tiers.
I want you to try a thought experiment right now, wherever you are. Look around your room. Find a coffee mug.
Okay, a mug.
The word mug, currently sitting in your brain, has no handles. You cannot physically grasp a thought. And if you drew a picture of that mug, the drawing couldn't hold hot coffee. Only the Aini level, the actual heavy ceramic object sitting on your desk, can fulfill its purpose.
And because logic is forced to deal only with the mental concepts and the spoken words, a critical vulnerability emerges. How accurately do our spoken words actually map over our mental concept?
Right.
If the word is just a crude symbol for a highly complex thought, does the symbol cover the entire thought, or does it miss the edges?
This brings us to what I've started calling the geography of meaning. If words are just maps for our thoughts, how good are the maps? Classical logic details 3 specific types of coverage.
Yes.
Let's dig into these because we use them every single day without realizing it. Mutabakat, tazamun, and ultizam.
These are the 3 ways a word drapes over a meaning. The first is the gold standard, mutabakat.
Mutabakat.
This translates roughly to complete overlap, or perfect correspondence. This occurs when the word you use perfectly and entirely covers the concept it is meant to signify.
Okay, give me an example.
In the rigorous world of classical logic, the standard example is the core definition of a human being. A human is defined as a thinking animal. Therefore, when a logician says human, the word has perfect mutabakat with the concept of a thinking animal.
So it's a 1-to-1 match.
You mean the entirety of it? Nothing is left out and no extra baggage is added? The map is exactly the same size as the territory.
Okay, that's the ideal. Clean mathematical precision. But honestly, human conversation is incredibly messy. We almost never speak with perfect overlap. We take shortcuts constantly. Which leads to the second type of coverage, tazamun.
Tazamun is partial overlap or inclusion. This happens when the word we use covers only a fraction of the concept we are actually referring to. Or, more commonly in daily life, when we state the whole to mean only a part.
I love the everyday examples for this. The classical rule of thumb is mention the whole, intend the part. Like when someone calls you and says, hey, I'm going to be late, my car broke down.
Let's dissect that phrase. When someone says, my car broke down, it is statistically impossible that the entire vehicle, the seats, the radio, the glass, the paint, the chassis, all simultaneously cease to exist in every functional aspect.
Right. The seats didn't break down.
Exactly. What they actually mean is that a highly specific part, the alternator, the battery, a tire, failed. But it would be exhausting to explain the precise mechanical failure every time. So they mention the whole, the car, but intend only the part, the battery. That is tazamun.
Another one we hear on the news all the time, the army took over the government. You aren't saying that every single mess hall cook, truck mechanic, and infantryman orchestrated a synchronized coup.
Of course not.
You mean a very specific faction of generals at the top. But we use the universal container to complain about the particular element inside it.
It is an essential linguistic shortcut.
Yep.
But then we arrive at the third type, which is arguably the most complex and philosophically rich, altisam or telazum.
Right, altisam.
This deals with implication and logical necessity. This occurs when a word points to something that is completely outside its direct, literal definition, But that outside thing is logically necessitated by the word itself.
I'm struggling with this one a bit. If Tazamun is a partial overlap, how is Eltizam different? Is it just about reading between the lines?
Let's go back to the concept of the human as a thinking animal. The strict definition of a human does not contain the phrase capable of reading and writing.
True.
We're not biologically or logically defined as writing animals. However, the sheer fact of being a thinking animal necessitates the capacity to learn, to process abstract symbols, and subsequently to write.
Oh, I see.
Therefore, the word human implies, which is ultizam, the capacity for literacy, even though literacy isn't in the literal definition. The meaning exists outside the word, but is tethered to it by necessity.
Okay, wait. Let me see if I can translate this into a modern tech metaphor to make sure my brain has the patch installed.
Go ahead.
Tazamun, the partial overlap, is like yelling across the house, the Wi-Fi is down, when actually just your specific laptop disconnected from the router.
Perfect.
The global internet is fine, your ISP is fine, the router is fine. Only your tiny part of the network failed. Use the whole to describe the part.
Exactly.
But iltizam, the implication, is like telling a friend, I just downloaded a 100-gigabyte video game. You didn't explicitly say the words, I own a hard drive, but the act of downloading 100 gigs necessitates that you possess a storage device.
Yes.
The hard drive is implicitly tethered to the action.
That is a phenomenal translation of the concepts.
Yeah.
And it highlights exactly why the logicians were so obsessed with this idea of necessity losum, because they noticed a profound difference between mental necessity and external necessity.
Meaning the difference between things that have to be true in our minds versus things that have to be true out in the physical universe.
Precisely. Mental necessity exists purely in the pristine realm of logic and mathematics. For instance, the concept of the number 2 mentally necessitates the prior existence of the concept of 1.
Because you can't have 2 without 1.
You cannot construct a 2 without a 1. Or the number 4 necessitates the property of being an even number divisible by 2. This is a mental necessity. It is true regardless of whether the physical universe exists or not.
Right.
External necessity, however, is bound by the messy laws of physics. For example, the presence of fire necessitates the presence of heat. Fire implies heat, but that is an external physical reality. God or nature could theoretically alter the laws of physics so fire is cold, but you cannot alter the laws of logic so that 4 is an odd number.
Wow. Okay, so understanding how these words map onto meaning, whether they perfectly overlap, partially include, or silently imply, it sets the stage for what I think is the most profound realization of this entire deep dive. Because if we are constantly navigating the gap between the mental concept and the physical reality, we hit a fundamental split in how humans perceive the world and each other. We are always wrestling with the difference between what something is on the inside and what it looks like on the outside.
This is where we must introduce 3 of the most crucial and tragically most conflated terms in classical philosophy.
Right.
We're talking about mahayat, hakikat, and huviyet, essence, reality, and identity. In modern conversation, we use these words as if they mean the exact same thing. But to a classical thinker, blurring these 3 categories is the root of almost all human confusion.
I am totally guilty of using them interchangeably, so let's break them apart. Start with mahayat. What is it?
Mahayat translates to quiddity, or essence. It derives from the Arabic phrase mahaya, which literally asks, what is it? Logicians refer to this as the Kinderfragen, the child's ultimate, most devastating philosophical question.
The why phase.
When a toddler points a sticky finger at a dog and asks, what is this? They aren't asking for the dog's name or its breed. They are asking for its mahayat, its fundamental essence.
Okay, got it.
Crucially, mahayat consists purely of mental components. It is the sterile blueprint in the Zini layer we discussed earlier. If you ask, what is the mahayat of a human being? The answer is the strict mental definition, a thinking animal.
Okay, so mahaya has no physical form yet. It is just the recipe card. So what happens when that recipe actually gets cooked and put on the table?
Then you transition into hakikat, which translates to truth or reality. Hakikat is the external manifestation of that essence.
It becomes physical.
It is no longer just the idea of a human in the mind. It is the actual physical existence of individuals out in the Aini world. It is the realization that the essence has achieved physical form. It is the fact that human beings exist.
So mahia is the mental concept of thinking animal, and hakikat is the physical reality that flesh and blood humans are walking around on Earth. But wait, where do I come in? Like, where does my personality or the fact that I'm wearing a blue shirt or that I have a scar on my chin come into play?
That is the third term, Huviet, which means identity.
Huviet.
Huviet is what happens when you combine the universal hakikat, the physical reality of a human, with highly specific, individualizing traits.
Okay, let's trace the path then.
Sure. The Mahayet is thinking animal.
Hmm.
The hakikat is the existence of a physical human. The Huziet is a specific human named John, who is wearing glasses, has a gray beard, works as an accountant, and speaks with a slight stutter.
It's all the details.
Exactly. Huviet is the characterized, individualized version of the essence.
I want to push back on this, or at least play devil's advocate for a second, because if I follow this logic to its conclusion, it feels intensely radical.
How so?
If I lose my glasses tomorrow, and I shave my beard, and I quit my job, well, my Huvia, my identity has drastically changed. The world sees a totally different person. But my hakikat, my reality as a physical human, stays exactly the same. And my Mahayat, my mental essence as a thinking animal, is completely untouched. Are you saying that our true essence is entirely mental and everything physical that makes me is just window dressing?
According to this classical framework, absolutely yes. Your essence is defined strictly by the mental components that categorize what you are. All of those physical traits, the beard, the clothes, the job, are considered accidents. They happen to you, but they are not you.
That is heavy.
And this leads to a fascinating observation about modern society. Think about where we focus our attention today. Journalists, social media, the 24-hour news cycle, they are almost entirely obsessed with Hiviet.
Oh, entirely.
They care about the optics, the identity, the who, the what, the where, the superficial traits. They cover the changing of the glasses and the shaving of the beard.
Yeah, the drama, the accidents.
Exactly. Philosophers and classical logicians, however, do not care about Hiviet. They care about the Mahaya. They look past all the noise of identity to ask the core Kinderfragen, what is the essence of this thing? What is actually happening underneath the accident?
That is profound. We are drowning in a culture of Huviet. We are fighting massive cultural wars over identity, over appearances and avatars, while completely starving for discussions about essence, about Mahayat.
We really are.
And to protect this pure mental essence from being corrupted by all those constantly changing physical accidents, logicians had to build an incredibly strict sorting mechanism for words. Which brings us to the actual building blocks of logic.
Yes, if the ultimate goal of a logician is to reach absolute truth, what they call Burhan, or an undeniable apodeictic proof, you cannot build your arguments out of messy, emotional, or accidental words.
Right, you need solid bricks.
You have to categorize your vocabulary flawlessly. The very first division they make is looking at a word and asking, is this simple mufrad or is it composite mulaf?
I found the examples for this division so helpful because it shows how context completely shifts the function of a word. Let's walk through the name Abdullah.
Abdullah perfectly illustrates the point. In Arabic, abde means servant or slave, and Allah means God.
Right.
If you are reading a theological text and you encounter the phrase Abdullah being used to literally describe the nature of a prophet as the servant of God, then the word functions as a composite word, mulef.
Because the pieces matter.
Because parts of the word actively point to parts of the meaning. Abdi points to the servitude, points to the divine. You can break it apart and the pieces still carry their weight.
Okay, but what if it's just a name?
Right. If Abdullah is just a guy you work with at the bank, and you say, hey, Abdullah, can you pass the stapler? The word functions as a simple word, mufrad. You're not intending the composite theological meaning. It is just a single, unified sound patch that points to the Huviet of your coworker.
And it works with actions too, right? Like stone thrower, that is definitively composite. The word stone points to the physical rock. The Aini and thrower points to the kinetic action. It's built out of conceptual Lego bricks.
Exactly. And once they sort the simple from the composite, they make another foundational division. Universal, which is kuli, versus particular, which is kuzi.
Kuli and kuzi.
The word human is a universal term. It applies to you, it applies to me, and applies to billions of others simultaneously. Using the word does not prevent shared participation in its meaning.
But if I say your specific name, that is particular. It points to one specific individual entity in the external world.
Correct. And then we reach the granddaddy of all logical divisions, the one that strips reality down to the bare studs. Essential, which is zati, versus accidental, which is arazi.
This is where we return to Aristotle, right? Because this distinction is the beating heart of his philosophy. To define reality, logicians must ruthlessly separate what is essential to an object's existence from what is merely an accidental characteristic.
Let's go back to our definition of humans. Aristotle argued that the capacity for thinking is an essential trait, Zati. It is the core of our mahayat. Laughing, however, he categorized as an accidental trait, a razi.
Wait, hold on. This always trips me up. Humans are the only animals on Earth that laugh. It is a uniquely human behavior. Why wouldn't that be considered essential to what makes us human?
Because uniqueness does not equal essence.
Oh.
Here is the rigorous logical test they apply. Can you imagine the object without the trait?
Okay.
You can easily conceptualize a human being who lives their entire tragic life and never once laughs. Their absolute lack of laughter does not strip them of their biological or logical humanity. They are still a human.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Therefore, laughing is external to the core definition. It is an accident. However, try to conceptualize a human being who does not possess the capacity for thought. If you completely remove thought, you no longer have a human. You have something else entirely.
A completely different category.
Therefore, thought cannot be removed without destroying the subject. It is our essence. It is Zati.
I see the mathematical beauty of it, but I have to ask, if logic's ultimate goal is to aggressively strip away all the accidental stuff, to strip away the laughter, the quirks, the fashion, the specific traffic lights of our culture, just to isolate this undeniable, cold, abstract truth, isn't that a profoundly lonely place?
It can feel that way, yes.
Like, what happens to the actual human experience when we reduce it to pure essence?
The friction you're sensing there is the eternal tension between the logician and the poet. The logician demands absolute purity because you cannot build a structural bridge out of emotions. You need mathematics.
Right.
But the human experience, the joy and the sorrow, happens entirely in the messy, accidental world of the Huviad. But we have to remember something crucial here. This rigorous, almost surgical stripping away the accidental wasn't invented in the modern era of sterile laboratories and supercomputers.
No, this is ancient.
This is an ancient practice. And ironically, our modern clinical understanding of the mind was actually born directly out of how these ancients defined the immortal soul.
This was the part of the deep dive that completely fractured my understanding of history. We usually think of modern science and ancient philosophy as mortal enemies.
Right, completely at odds.
But if we trace this back to Aristotle's seminal text, Peri-Hermenius, or On Interpretation, we find the smoking gun. There is a specific quote from that text that ties all four levels of reality together.
That text is the bedrock. Aristotle wrote, "Spoken words are the symbols of mental experience, and written words are the symbols of spoken words."
Now, in English translation, that sounds like a very dry clinical statement from a linguistics textbook. But when you unpack the original Greek vocabulary Aristotle was using, it dramatically changes the temperature of the entire concept.
Let's dig into that Greek vocabulary because it is stunning. When Aristotle talks about spoken words or voice, he uses the word phone.
Yes, phone, which is the root for our modern words telephone or phonetics. It refers to the physical vibration of sound. But far more importantly, when he refers to the mind or mental experience, he doesn't use a biological term for a squishy brain and a skull. He uses the word psyche.
Psyche, which means soul or spirit.
Right. And the experiences, the impressions, or the concepts held within that psyche are called pathos, which translates to affections, intense emotions, or deep spiritual impressions.
So if we were to translate Aristotle more viscerally, capturing the weight of his worldview, the sentence reads, "The physical sounds of our voice, phone, are symbols of the deep affections and impressions, pathos, of our immortal soul, psyche."
That is entirely theological. The concept of the mind wasn't a computer processor to them. It was inextricably linked to the immortal soul.
Completely linked.
The classical sources use the Arabic words nefs and ruh to describe this exact same space. The mind was the divine spark.
It was heavily theological. And as history progressed, that theological weight became a problem for the scientific revolution. The expert in the source material details how, over centuries, this vocabulary was aggressively secularized.
They had to sanitize it.
Philosophers like René Descartes in the 17th century needed a clean, secular space to study reason, free from the theological authority of the church. So they started using the Latin word mens, which gives us mental or mind, to deliberately distance themselves from the heavy religious implications of words like anima or psyche.
They basically rebranded the soul to make it safe for science, but the underlying architecture didn't change at all.
Not at all.
The giants of modern thought people like Ferdinand de Saussure, who is basically the father of modern linguistics, or empiricists like John Locke and David Hume, they built their entire modern theories of mental impressions directly on top of the foundation of Aristotle's pathos.
They absolutely did. Saussure's groundbreaking theories on the arbitrary nature of the sign, the idea that the sound apple has no inherent connection to the physical fruit, is routinely taught in universities as a modern 20th century breakthrough.
But it's not.
But classical linguistic science holds the 2,500-year-old patents on all of these ideas. They had mapped the Muvasa, the Delairier lapses millennia ago. Modern science just swapped the terminology.
We really do suffer from chronological snobbery. We assume that because we have iPhones, we evolved past ancient philosophy. We think we replaced them.
We didn't replace them, we just put a new coat of paint on it.
Exactly. We just retranslated their vocabulary. We swapped soul for mind. We swapped pathos for data processing. But the exact same four-tier hierarchy of reality, object, concept, sound, text still dictates every single text message, every political speech, and every thought we have.
The ancients mapped the territory.
Yeah.
We're just using different colored markers to draw the exact same borders.
Yeah.
But when you truly internalize this map, when you realize that every word you speak is merely a conventional agreement, which is merely a symbol for a mental impression, which is merely an attempt to represent an external reality, it forces a profound humility.
It really does.
It forces you to communicate with much more intention and to listen with much more grace, because you know how fragile the signal actually is.
We have climbed an absolute mountain of thought today. We started at the base with a simple question about an apple and realized that naming a mouse requires a massive collective software patch. We explored the world beyond words, looking at how nonverbal signals manipulate us, from the natural biology of a blush to the logical deduction of a footprint.
And we journeyed through the four distinct levels of existence: the physical Aini, the mental Zini, the spoken Lofsi, and the written Hadi.
Yeah.
And we used Magritte's painting of a pipe to expose how dangerously easy it is to confuse a flat symbol for a multidimensional reality.
We mapped the geography of meaning, figuring out how our words perfectly overlap, partially include, or silently imply things we didn't even say. We stripped away the accidental, superficial traits of our identity, our huviyat, to find the pure mental blueprint of our essence, our mahayat. And finally, we saw how the ancient theological concept of the immortal soul was quietly secularized to give birth to the modern science of the mind.
It is a stark reminder that you are not just a passive consumer of information. Every time you speak, every time you send an email, or even every time you interpret a look on someone's face, you are actively navigating a multi-layered matrix of reality and representation that took humanity millennia to chart. You are an active participant in a 2,500-year-old conversation.
So as you go back into the physical accounting world today, I want to leave you with one final provocative question. We've spent this whole time learning that the written word only signifies the spoken sound, and the spoken sound only signifies the mental concept. Words are just crude nets we throw over our thoughts.
So here is the question. What happens to a thought that you do not have a word for? Are your deepest, most profound experiences trapped by the limited software patch of your language? Or is your mind, your ancient psyche, vast enough to hold a reality that words can never even touch?